listening to the Hidden Killers podcast with Tony Brueski,
featuring former federal prosecutor and president of West Coast Trial Lawyers, Neama Rahmani.
Alex Murdaugh getting a chance to face his victims in court and apologize, kind of. Maybe rebut some of the things they have to say. Maybe get his own narrative in there a little bit stronger, so he thought. Here to discuss the sentencing of Alex Murdaugh and his most recent court appearance, Neama Rahmani, former federal prosecutor and attorney. Anyway, there's a lot to unpack in what happened in the courtroom the other day, from the victim impact statements to the meandering 45-minute speech by Alex Murdaugh about everything. What was your takeaways from what we saw?
My takeaway was, and I watched the whole thing and actually covered it live, was that, the case was really about financial fraud in the victims, but it really turned into the murders, right?
Yeah.
So obviously the victims started talking about the impact on them. And, look, Murdaugh did horrible things, right? I mean, these are people that were seriously injured. They had lost loved ones, and he stole from them.
Yeah.
And he stole a lot of money from them. So the focus should have been on them. And, frankly, I was surprised at how gracious and forgiving many of them were. Many of them talked about God, and, they were very cordial to their former lawyer and convicted felon and thief. What was also interesting is many of them were addressing Murdaugh directly. Normally, when it comes to victim impact statements, you're supposed to talk to the judge, and really it's because the judge is the one who's making a decision. But, they were addressing Murdaugh. He was kind of, responding in some instances directly to them. So that part was interesting and certainly unique. And then, of course, when Murdaugh gets up to give his own statement, he's talking about Buster and how SLED reminded him a little bit of OJ,
a little bit,
trying to find the real killers, right?
Yes.
So it did have OJ vibes, but the whole thing, it was fascinating TV, but it was somewhat anticlimactic because there's different types of pleas. Some pleas where the judge determines the sentence. This was a binding plea. So the judge rejected the 27-year recommendation. The whole agreement would be unwound and the case was going to go to trial. And I didn't think that was going to happen. So I thought Judge Newman was going to rubber stamp this deal and retire and be on his way. And that's exactly what happened.
It certainly was some dramatic moments there in court. Were you surprised at all by, I guess, Alex's statement or the fact that Judge Clifton Newman let him go on for as long as he did? What was supposed to be a quick little 5-minute speech turned into, basically kind of preaching to the choir about how horrible of a human being he is.
Yeah, it was very long. And Judge Newman, maybe because it's such a high profile case that was being watched around the world, I think he basically let a lot more go, maybe because it was one of his probably last cases he was going to handle on the bench. I think he said he had 30 or 40 days left as a judge before he retired. So he was counting down the days, but really sort of anything goes. And I think he just let the parties and the lawyers and the victims just talk. And that's exactly what happened.
There was a moment in there that it stood out to me. It was when he was talking about the Gloria Satterfield death and basically trying to scam the insurance company. His choice of words were a little weird to me, and maybe you can make more sense of it. And I'm just paraphrasing here, but it was something to the effect of, with the monies that were recovered there, that it was in good intent. I didn't have any ill intent here when I made up the story about the dogs tripping Gloria. You made up the story. Hasn't that been the story the entire time? Is there another story we're unaware of here? Because my mind goes to, well, what really happened to Gloria then? Because if it was unintentional, whether it was the dogs, whether she slipped on a sock, whether she just tripped, whatever it may be, if it's unintentional, the insurance company's probably not going to care. Either way, they will pay out. It was, something that was unintentional. But if you go to intentional, then you have a whole other issue at play where the insurance company would not, in fact, likely pay out, at least the way that they did. Was that a Freudian slip on the part of Alex Murdaugh at that moment?
I don't think so, and this is why. For there to be a personal injury case, there has to be some sort of negligence, right? So if Gloria, tripped and fell on her own and nothing that, Murdaugh or any of the other family members did, there would be no personal injury claim, right? So what he did was try to set up a case where he was negligent, right? The dogs were out and, he didn't, leash them up or just wasn't careful. That way, Gloria's family could go after his own insurance company. Of course, he couldn't do that. So he gave the case to his friend to sue his own insurance. The insurance tendered the money, gave a settlement, and of course, Murdaugh and his friend stole the money from. So it's kind of a fascinating fraud scheme. But there had to have been some sort of negligence for Murdaugh's insurance policy to pay if it was just sort of an accident and he wasn't at fault, then the insurance wouldn't kick in. But he did admit to the scheme. So first he duped the insurance company, then he duped the victim's family, and he's just been a fraudster all around.
But why did he have to dupe the insurance company, I guess, is the question. It couldn't, he can't necessarily sue himself, but he had somebody else go in and file the lawsuit on the behalf of Satterfield. But what was the duping there? Why wouldn't they still file the claim if she did trip over dogs for negligence?
Well, there would have to be some sort of theory of liability, right?
Sure.
There's some sort of claims that are, no fault claims. Like maybe she could file a workers' compensation claim, right? If you're injured on the job, you're paid no matter what. Now, the payments are a lot less, but for there to be a tort claim, a third party personal injury claim, there has to be some liability on the part of the defendant. So he manufactured the liability. It sounds like he had nothing to do with her death necessarily, but tried to create a theory where he was involved, he was at fault, he was responsible to get his insurance, his liability insurance to pay.
Okay, that makes a little more sense in terms of all of that. What was your take on the very end of it? Judge Clifton Newman gave I love his speeches that he gives because they're very insightful. It reminds me of like grandpa giving you little insight from years and years of life. What was your take at the very end, though, where Alex Murdaugh, he literally started laughing on the way out of court?
Yeah, it was surprising. Judge Newman gave his own statement. I think one of the most fascinating parts, again, obviously, look, this is the cardinal sin for a lawyer. I'm a lawyer to steal from your clients, but, they're stealing from your clients and there's killing your own wife and son. So, what was really interesting about Newman's speech this time around was he was talking about a conference he was at, and he saw Murdaugh poolside after the conference, shortly after his family members were killed. And it was just very sort of interesting that, again, even Judge Newman went down the murder route, even though the case was just about the fraud. So I thought it was fascinating. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with the murder case. Of course, that's we have an evidentiary hearing, and there's a possibility of a new trial. So, I think yes, sort of about 85% by statute there in South Carolina. So, you can do the math. There's a possibility that, again, if the murder conviction is overturned and he actually wins when there's a new trial, we might see good old Murdaugh back on the street, I think when he's 75 or 76. Yeah,
he'll be in at the IHOP and telling all sorts of stories.
Want to listen ad-free? Want advanced access to all of our interviews before anyone else?
Become a True Crime Today Premium Plus subscriber on Apple Podcasts.
You get every episode commercial-free.
So you can binge on true crime
until you can binge no more.
Search True Crime Today Premium Plus on Apple Podcasts now, or go to our podcast page and sign up now.
More of the Hidden Killers podcast next.